Hey, first grade, happy Monday. Hope you're enjoying your slothy, sleepy day where we kind of do everything at a slow pace today. We're going to check in with Ramona because when we left off, if you remember, Ramona was saying a bad word. Does anyone remember what the terrible, horrible, bad word she said was? Guts. Guts. And her mom and her dad and Beezus laughed at her. And she felt really embarrassed because she thought guts was a really big, bad, naughty word to say. And I mean, guts isn't really that big and bad and naughty. And so they were laughing at her. And she ran to her room and threw herself on her bed. So that's where we are. Then Ramona felt her mother's hand on her back. Ramona, she said gently, what are we going to do with you? With red eyes, a swollen face, and a streaming nose, Ramona sat up and glared at her. Love me! Her voice was fierce with hurt. Shocked at her own words, she buried her face in the pillow. She had no tears left. Dear heart, said Mrs. Quimby, we do love you. Ramona sat up and faced her mother, who looked tired, as if she had been through many scenes with Ramona and knew many more lay ahead. You do not. You love Beezus. There, she had said it right out loud. For years she had wanted to tell her parents how she felt. Mr. Quimby wiped Ramona's nose on a Kleenex, which he then handed to her. She clenched it in her fist and glowered at her parents. Of course we love Beezus, said Mrs. Quimby. We love you both. You love her more, said Ramona. A whole lot more. She felt better for having said the words, getting them off her chest, as grown-ups would say. Love isn't like a cup of sugar that gets used up, said Mrs. Quimby. There's enough to go around. Loving Beezus doesn't mean we don't have enough love left for you. You don't laugh at Beezus all the time, said Ramona. They used to, said Beezus, who was unable to stay away from this family discussion. They always laughed at the funny things I did, and it used to make me mad. Ramona sniffed and waited for Beezus to continue. Beezus was serious. Like the time when I was about your age and I thought frankincense and myrrh were something the three wise men were bringing to the baby Jesus to put on his rash, like the stuff Mom used on you when you were a baby. Mom and Dad laughed, and Mom told all her friends, and they laughed too. Oh, dear, said Mrs. Quimby. I had no idea I upset you that much. Well, you did, said Beezus, still grumpy over the memory. And there was the time I thought toilet water was water out of the toilet. You practically had hysterics. Oh, now you're exaggerating, said Mrs. Quimby. Comforted by this unexpected support from her sister, Ramona scrubbed her face with her soggy Kleenex. Mama, if you really do love me, why do I have to go to school? At the same time, she wondered how she could find out what frankincense and myrrh were without letting anyone know of her ignorance. She'd always thought in a vague sort of way they were something expensive, like perfume and whiskey done up in an extra fancy Christmas wrapping. Ramona, everyone has to go to school, Mrs. Quimby answered. Loving you has nothing to do with it. Well, then why can't I be in the other first grade, the one in room 2? Ramona asked. Mrs. Griggs doesn't like me. Of course she likes you, contradicted Mrs. Quimby. No, she doesn't, said Ramona. If she liked me, she wouldn't make me tell Susan in front of the whole class that I was sorry I scrunched her out, and she would ask me to lead the Pledge of Allegiance, and she wouldn't say bad things about me on my progress report. I told you Mrs. Griggs was great on apologies, Beezus reminded her family, and she will get around to asking Ramona to lead the flag salute. She asks everybody. But Beezus, you got along with Mrs. Griggs when you had her, said Mrs. Quimby. I guess so, said Beezus. She wasn't my favorite teacher, though. What was wrong with her? Asked Mrs. Quimby. Well, there wasn't anything really wrong with her, I guess, answered Beezus. She just wasn't very exciting is all. She wasn't mean or anything like that. We just seemed to go along doing our work, and that was it. Was she unfair? Asked Mr. Quimby. Beezus considered the question. No, but I was the kind of child she liked, neat and dependable. I bet you never wasted paste, said Ramona, who was not a paste waster herself. Too much paste was likely to spoil a piece of artwork. No, admitted Beezus. I wasn't that type. Ramona persisted. Why can't I change to room 2? Mr. Quimby took over. Because Mrs. Griggs is teaching you to read and do arithmetic, because the things she said about you are fair. You do need to learn self-control and to keep your hands to yourself. There are all kinds of teachers in the world, just as there are all kinds of other people. You must learn to get along with them. Maybe Mrs. Griggs doesn't understand how you feel, But you aren't always easy to understand. Did you ever think of that? Please, Daddy, begged Ramona. Please don't make me go back to room 1. Buck up, Ramona, said Mr. Quimby. Show us your spunk. Ramona felt too exhausted to show anyone her spunk, but for some reason her father's order made her feel better. If her mother had said poor baby, she would have felt like crying again. Mrs. Quimby led her from the room and, skipping her bath, helped her into bed. Before the light was turned out, Ramona noticed the wild animals of Africa had been returned to her bookcase. Stay with me, Mama, coaxed Ramona, dreading solitude, darkness, and the gorilla in that book. Mrs. Quimby turned off the light and sat down on the bed. Mama? Yes, Ramona. Isn't guts a bad word? Mrs. Quimby thought for a moment. I wouldn't say it's exactly a bad word. It isn't the nicest word in the world, but there are much worse words. Now, go to sleep. Ramona wondered what could be worse than guts. Out in the kitchen, Mr. Quimby was rattling dishes and singing, "Oh, my gal, she am a spunky gal, sing Polly Wolly Doodle all the day." Ramona always felt safe while her father was awake. Dread of something was worse after he'd gone to bed and the house was dark. No need to turn herself into a paper doll for a while. Crying had left Ramona tired and limp, but somehow she felt better, more at peace with herself, as if trouble and guilt had been washed away by tears. She knew her father was singing about her, and in spite of her troubles, Ramona found comfort in being her father's spunky gal. Somehow, something seemed less frightening. Worn out as she was by anger and tears, Ramona faced the truth. She could no longer go on being afraid of the dark. She was too weary to remain frightened and sleepless. She could no longer fear shadows and spooks and strange little noises. She stepped bravely out of the bed, and in the faint light from the hall, pulled the big, flat book from her bookcase. She carried it into the living room and shoved it under a cushion. Her parents, busy with supper dishes in the kitchen, didn't know she was out of bed. She walked back to her room, climbed into bed, and pulled up the covers. Nothing had grabbed her by the ankles. Nothing slithered out from under the curtains to harm her. Nothing had chased her. She was safe. Gratefully, Ramona said her prayers and, exhausted, fell asleep. All right, the chapter on Tuesday is called Chapter 9, Mr. Quimby's Spunky Gal. And I'm looking to see, where is chapter, is that the last one? Give me just a second because I'm going to peek and see. Is there no chapter 10? Oh boy, so it's a really long chapter. But it looks like we're going to get through this before the end of the year. I'm so glad. So it looks like we'll finish up probably on Wednesday or Thursday, depending on how slow or quickly I go. All right, guys, I hope you enjoy Ramona the Brave, and I will see you tomorrow.